Shana's. So we are a little bit past 6. I'm thinking this may be our our select few this evening, but I'm going to just go out there on a limb and say it's quality, not quantity this evening. No question about that.
Yes.
So for those of you who, I mean, we could actually go around the room and actually talk about who all of us are. Why don't we maybe do that? And at the end of that, I will introduce Imad a little bit more formally and we can get started. But before I ask people to maybe just say a bit about themselves, just let me state that this is the second in a little short 2-part series that we're doing, part of a bigger project we're doing called Ancient Texts Contemporary Conversations. That's an initiative of St. James and the Montreal City Mission with the support, which we are really grateful for, of the United Church of Canada Foundation, which backed us up on this one and encouraged us to do this. So we're really grateful for that. And we had a first session back a few months back where we looked at the book of Ruth and dug that one apart and had some conversations about the book of Ruth. And for the second piece, we decided we wanted to work on the Qur'an. And for that, we turned to our friend Imad Balkis, who I will introduce a little bit more in a moment. But because we are so few around this table, maybe I could just ask people to introduce themselves. I'm Royal Orr, member of St. James United, as well as a member of the board of directors of the Montreal City Mission. And I live in Hatley in the Eastern Townships, and I'm just really happy to be here and be part of this evening. So I'm just going to go around in where my screen says, and Anwar is the next person. Anwar, could you maybe introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Anwar. I work at Montreal City Mission since 2015. I'm having fun.
Great. Paula.
No, I'm not. Director of Montreal City Mission, colleague of Anwar's, and also member of Anwar, of course, and member of St. James as well.
Maher, we haven't been speaking with Maher, but Maher?
Maher is my friend. I'm not sure if he's there or is also fasting. Yeah, he's my friend, and he's volunteering with us, and he's one of the community of friends.
Excellent. Ahab, are you with us? Can you introduce yourself?
I am with you. I'm Ahab. I'm also part of the board of Montreal City Mission and a community activist. And Tally is here as well.
Hi.
Sally? Who are you, Sally?
I'm just the sidekick to Ehab.
Well, that's already a pretty big statement. So thank you, Sally. And Shanna, maybe you could give us a sense of who you are.
Hi there. So I work for the Regional Council of Naganhaga Regional Council, and in the role of Program Support Minister for Youth and Young Adults. And I heard about this through Paula, and I thought it was really interesting sounding conversation. And I live in Sherbrooke, Quebec, in the Eastern Townships.
Great. Thank you all. So let me then introduce a little bit more formally Imad, who is our expert and leader in this conversation this evening. Imad Balkis was born in Lebanon to Palestinian refugee parents. He went to school in Beirut and later studied computer science with a specialization in information systems. He then had a career of 37 years working for a number of United Nations organizations and agencies based in Austria, the Middle East, and in Canada, and he's just retired from that work. But it is a busy retirement because he is currently a PhD student in religious studies at McGill University in Montreal. He has been part of our community of friends for a number of years now, participating in our interfaith gatherings, and recently hosted a talk with the St. James congregation for a previous Muslim Awareness Week on the topic of Jesus and Islam. We had a great session last week where we dug into a little bit the cultural impact of the Quran, a little bit what is it and what effect and presence does it have in the lives of Muslims. And so this is a bit of a follow on that, but with a bit more tight focus on an issue of particular concern to St. James MCM, which is refugees, which is a big part of what we do, and Shanna is involved with refugees as well. So we are very much looking forward to this, Imad, and we feel we are in your hands for this conversation this evening.
Thank you, Royal. Thank you all. So basically, this is as I said, the last time's topic was more colorful by its nature. This is more a bit on the dry side, but we'll see what we can make of it. But basically, so Islam did introduce, as the latest sibling in the monotheistic family, it did introduce its own new concepts and new views on many social and cosmological issues. But it did also quite often build on already existing ones. I mean, it did sometimes the Quran posits itself as correcting a concept or denying something or adjusting certain concepts. So, but Islam did absorb many of the cultures and concepts that were there in its region, the Afro-Asian region, actually, the Persian, some African, Turkey, even Athens through Hellenism, all this wider region, the Afro-Asian region and part of Europe. I think it did absorb all those cultures and represent some, it did leave its impact on this culture of that region. So in Islamic law, when we talk about Islamic law deals with the issue of refugees under the topic of hijrah. It calls it hijrah. Hijrah is being translated into migration and immigration. It's so the topic is dealt with from the point of view that individuals have the right both to seek and to be granted refuge or asylum when persecuted or when facing threats to their life, to their well-being, property even. So this generally, the legal Islamic law deals with this generally under the wider Islamic legal doctrine of which is called objectives of Sharia. There are 5 items that are considered the drivers of Sharia. So one of them, they include the protection of religion, protection of life, protection of lineage, protection of intellect and wealth. So this is the general context under which, from which the topic of refugees is approached. And the concept of hijrah itself is quite prominent in the Islamic, in the history of Islam, because the term appears many times in the Quran, the term hijrah or derivations of which appear in the Quran. And there are two episodes of immigration, of hijrah, that are mentioned, that are prominent in the Islamic history. One of them is when in the early days of Islam in Mecca, when the Prophet and his followers were persecuted, so he sent 70 of them, asked them to go to Ethiopia. So they crossed the Red Sea into Ethiopia, where they sought refuge there because they were told that there is a Christian king there who will be sympathetic to you, rather than these idolaters here. So so 70 of them went there, and there is history goes into the details of the sort of conversations that took place between him and this group, and he asked them to read, and they said our Quran speaks about Mary and Jesus, and they read the chapter of Mary, and the story has it that the king's eyes, he cried when he heard those words. But that's one episode of immigration which is famous under the name hijrah. So the name hijrah is prominent from that sense in the Islamic history, and the Islamic law goes into it from that. And the other, of course, is the hijrah of the Prophet, when he again, a few years later, left Mecca and went to Medina. So again, he migrated with a group of, actually many people went before him, and eventually he followed. So the concept of hijrah was integral in this sense. The hijrah of the Prophet took place in the year 662 AD. And so migration came to symbolize the movement of Muslims from lands of oppression into those of safety. This is it's associated with this concept. And the religion itself, so it started with migration, which in fact marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar. You know, Islamic calendar starts not with the birth of the Prophet, but starts with the first year of the Hijrah. So AH before Hijrah and after Hijrah. So it's 662 AD is year one in the Hijrah, in the Islamic calendar. So that's again just to show that the concept itself is prominent and it's always associated with immigration or migration.
Imad, maybe clarification. If
Yeah,
the moderator permits me, give me the permission.
Sure, please.
We spoke about the two stories of refugees or moving, the immigration. One I would call it the locally, El Medina, from Medina to Mecca, and one internationally to the
you can say that.
Christian state across the border.
Let's see. Yes.
What's the similarity of the stories there?
I think the similarity is that in both cases they were leaving a locality where they were being persecuted and seeking safety, but in both cases it's what we would call today a religious migration. I think that's the common between the two cases, is that they were leaving Mecca where they're not being treated well and they were being killed in some cases, and seeking a better place to grow and spread their ideas. I think that's the common between the two episodes. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, but if you can, more details about the story with the king. How he did accept them. They are from different religion. They think different. And he welcomed them.
The story is that as soon as this group left to meet to Ethiopia, the Meccans, the Qurayshi, the tribe of the Prophet, also sent someone to go ahead of them. And he went there and managed to see the king before. And he sort of prepared them. He said, these people say they are coming up with a new religion, and they say this and this and this. And they even talk about Jesus and Mary. They have something to say. So he was trying to scare him, not asking him not to meet them, not to give them protection. But the king said, no, I cannot just listen to them. I need to see these people. Let me hear from them what they have to say. And the story continues that they told him about this new religion, that they believe in the one God, and they believe Jesus is a prophet of this God, and Mary is mentioned in their book, and so on. And
yeah. So we touched on that last time. We did talk a little bit about Mary and her how she appears in the Quran, and so it's interesting to hear that it had that impact. I mean, in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, Mary is extremely important. So anybody showing up and talking about Mary probably is
Coptic Church, of course.
But the point you make is that it took enlightened leadership, or at least a leader willing to listen. Because it could have gone very differently and very badly if it hadn't been for some enlightened leadership, or at least some open leadership.
Absolutely, definitely. I think that's a theme of the story as well. So Anwar, I hope this is
I'm trying to make it difficult for you.
Yeah.
Time.
Okay. So, you know, medieval Islamic scholars of jurisprudence developed a whole body of legal theory about migration, its relationship to Islam, their legal pronouncements. I think their legal pronouncements are no longer able to today to adequately address the refugee crisis of our times. I think this is you know, this is a general debate around Islamic Sharia, and as we mentioned last time, uh, out of 6,200 something verses of the Quran, there are only 500 that have directly legal impact, you know, legal import. Only 500 talk about laws, divine laws. God says in this is how you do that, this is how you should do this. But that's about 500, mostly about the laws of divorce, marriage, dividing property when someone dies, inheritance laws. These are the bigger issues. But the majority of the Quran is not a legal document. The majority is about moral behavior, social impact. So again, the medieval scholars spent a lot of time and developed large corpus on many issues and among these refugees. But today, I mean, uh, I think we need new approaches today to if we are going to talk about a legal framework, Islamic legal framework. But so this presentation is not really the place to go into such legal theorizing, you know. But I can mention just some important aspects, important points. Apart from the issue of hijrah, you know, it's the duty of Muslims to accept and protect refugees for as long as they seek protection. So the Quran speaks explicitly about the issue of asylum seekers and refugees. There is a verse, a very famous verse. Let me see if I can put it up on screen, but just share screen, just to show the verse. Do you see anything now?
Not yet.
Okay, sharing. I'm gonna share this now.
Yes.
Huh?
We see that. Yes, there we see it.
Okay, so that's the verse that the Arabic script. And if any from the idolaters asked for refuge or protection, this is translation, you know, granted to them so they may hear the word of God, meaning the Quran. Then escort them to a place of safety, for they are a people who have no knowledge. So this is you would often hear. This is a verse that's often quoted when we discuss refugees. So it's so there is the legal aspect, but for a variety of historical reasons, this is not the primary aspect. The issue, I think, needs to be placed in the wider Quranic conception of doing good deeds and in the pursuit of justice, which is a bigger issue in the Quran. There's a lot more about justice, social justice, individuals, between groups, between nations. You know, justice is a big issue. So again, I think we could address this from the point of justice as well. So theoretically, you will find no lack of Quranic verses that is cited by Islamic scholars, encouraging humanitarian approach to refugees, asylum seekers, and displaced persons. But so as I said, I think it's the moral rather than the primarily legal aspect that is really more relevant. For example, let me unshare this maybe. How do I sharing? How do I stop sharing? Okay.
Ihab?
So
Gali,
so
why I'm calling Ihab Imad.
yes, tell
I
me.
think it's also, I think it's in kind of a conversation because I'm learning a lot, and we had 1 million conversation with Imad when he. So it's also I think it's in the loop of the also refugees, immigrants. It speaks about the multiculturalism, the diversity, المدينة القرية, when explaining things, right?
Yeah.
How it
Uh,
to the diversity, because coming to the city from the village, it's kind of the local immigration, the local movement.
This actually touches upon another subject, which is really a very elaborate subject. But Quran, the classical interpretation, the Quran always talks about the human community by the word, which is in Arabic, village. The word translated in Arabic, village. So every time the Quran talks about, mention this village or that village, which is understood as a human community, not really a village. And it's always understood like this, classically, that it's a human community. Until recently, there's a scholar who's saying, no, there's something big being missed here. If you review the older references in the Quran to the village, you see that it's not a neutral reference to a human community. It's always a community with a problem. It's always a corrupt community. It's always a community that deserves God's punishment, etc., etc. So it's always presented negatively. And on the other hand, the contrasting concept in Quran is Medina, which is city. So the Quran always, not in this case, we're not talking about Al Medina, where the Prophet, but the word Medina. So this scholar argues that the Qaria, the village and the city are two contrasting concepts in the Quran. One represents the totalitarian, one-minded direction, and the other represents diversity and more openness and different opinion. And they say, okay, actually they point to an important thing, that Al-Medina was not called Medina when the Prophet went there. He changed its name to Al-Medina. It was called Yathrib. The Arabic name is Yathrib. And they say there's a significance why the Prophet changed its name to Medina, because there is this underlying concept that in Medina you had Christians, you had Jews, you had non-believers, and the Prophet established his community in this context and dealing with everyone. So that's the new concept they argue of Medina, which is not. I don't know if that Anwar, but that's another topic on its own, definitely. But yeah, but there is a point in changing the name of Medina. It was Yathrib, and the Prophet calls it Medina, and there are more references usually in the Quran. When the Medina is mentioned, it be read as diversity, multitude of opinions, of religion, but in the village, it's always one.
Because as a consequences of the immigration of people, coming to Medina, it became, the center
more diverse.
It's Montreal, it's not Laval, and it's more kind of the same thing that we see here in Montreal. It's more multicultural, but if we go outside, it's just French Quebecois. They think the same, not the same, but I mean they have one. It's not. We're gonna publish this video, so I have to be careful.
You're recording, huh?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's for example, all of them Christians, no mosque there. It's one way. Otherwise, in the city, you have multiculturalism as a consequences of the immigration.
I think this is you're making a very important point, Anwar. I think this is this scholar argues that this concept of Medina is not just a description of. It's more. It entails more concept, more pluralism, and so on.
Yeah. Well, it's also a reminder that when and where Islam was developing and the revelation was being received was already a reasonably cosmopolitan place, right? There was already diversity in these communities, so Islam
in
itself
Medina, yeah.
kind of grows up in an environment where there is a kind of a cosmopolitan, almost urban context, which is where a lot of its foundations are laid. At least it seems to me.
Absolutely, that's at least at the smaller scale in Al Medina, because
Mhm.
it was a big change from Mecca. But later on, in the very early decades and centuries, when Islam spread, Islamic conquest, Persia, India, Egypt, it found itself, faced with all these different cultures. And historians and sociologists argue that it managed this quite well, developing a new civilization that did accommodate all these different ideas, not just Judaism and Christianity, but even Hellenistic Greek. The Muslim philosophers became the interpreters of Aristotle and Plato, and so on.
Mhm.
So the argument is they did develop a more of a cosmopolitan, universal sort of civilization,
Mhm.
Islamic civilization. We're talking now, not just the religion.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, but basically, yes, I mean, this all points to the not just the legal aspect of immigration, but of refugees. But I mean, I was thinking, as I was preparing this, at the height of the Syrian refugee crisis in 2015, for example, countries neighboring Syria, like Lebanon and Jordan, opened their doors for hundreds of thousands of refugees. They took a lot, and they're still there until today. Jordan, I think, has 1 million refugees. So there are countries that don't often talk about applying Islamic law, and they don't talk about politicize the issue of Islamic law, like Lebanon and Jordan, who open their doors for refugees. On the other hand, for example, take other countries in the rich Saudi Arabia didn't do the same, although they are the ones who are usually talking about, applying Islamic law and so on. So they didn't. So again, just to say that Islamic, as I said at the beginning, Islamic law needs to be, I don't think it needs to be reviewed. A lot of it needs to be updated if we're gonna really put it into use today. But just that's the side point. But I think, so strictly speaking, Islamic law does engage with the issue of refugees or asylum seekers. But as I said, that it's more. What I like to go more is into the Quranic context, not just the legal context. The Quran, namely the Quran, deals with this topic as primarily a moral rather than a legal issue. So the word refugees in the Quran is mentioned in the Quran, but more, it's treated more under the topic of justice, I think, rather than on its own. The Quran has numerous references to justice, particularly the importance of creating a just society, to provide a framework for justice in personal relationships, or towards the poor, the needy, or in a larger between communities or between nations. There are other, I mean, also the topic of refugees is also dealt with under, for example, zakat, the distribution of the Islamic the tax, Islamic tax that every Muslim has to pay a part of his wealth every year. It is called zakat. So in distributing zakah, the refugees are also part of the recipients of that. It's always mentioned that they have to get a part of that. So the Quran mentions this category, calls it Ibn Sabil, which is literally means the traveler. Ibn Sabil. So Ibn Sabil, the traveler, has part of that zakah. Traveler, again, I think could be understood as a refugee or someone who's seeking refuge, seeking protection on the way. But also another interesting thing is that the Quran mentions that those who are extending their hands to the refugees and to immigrants are praised in the Quran, which has, I think, that has a great relevance for our modern day refugee situation. Although the the verse in question is about a specific case, but I think it encompasses the general situation which some people are facing, uh, migrating, and people helping them. So I mean, I can put it up. I don't know if it's. Can you still see my screen?
No.
Oh no, I did. I stopped it. Let me see now. You see it now?
Yes.
So, so no. Do you see it? Do you see the present?
Yeah.
Present. Oh.
We see just the first page.
We see the first one, yeah, the one that you showed before.
I don't know why it's not. Okay, maybe this is. I can't. Anyway, but basically, there's a verse that I'll try to read it, but okay. It goes, and for the first and foremost of those who have sheltered and succored the faith, as well as those who follow them in righteousness, God is pleased with them, and they are pleased with him, and for them he has prepared gardens beneath which rivers flow, therein to abide beyond the count of time. This is the supreme attainment. So basically, it's talking about two groups: the people who migrated first and established themselves, and then they opened their homes for those who followed them. So so it talked about the two groups, but here the focus more is on the receiving group, that they are, they have big reward with God because they are receiving the new group. So that's what say as for the first and the foremost. But so yeah, it talks about a specific case where a first group of the faithful went before, and then they prepared the way, so to speak, for the second group. But I think that applies to any group that receives and prepares and facilitates for refugees. I think the meaning is there. So they are promised big reward, I think.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, in comparison to modern refugee law, I mean, some people argue that in comparison to the modern human rights, basically human rights, this is where we draw human rights and refugee laws. The Islamic perspective of hijrah, in a way, can be seen as providing a broader definition of a refugee. Because it's not just today we go into more technical economic refugee and political and so on and so on. The Quran doesn't, makes it broader. Anybody who needs help, needs protection, needs asylum is in this sense, it's a wider definition of who is a refugee. And plus the Quran puts the burden also on the individual. It's not just state and government, the individual urge to do this at an individual level as well. So organizing this into institutional and state level is an improvement, but even at the lower individual level, the Quran makes it a responsibility to act. So I'm afraid this is all I could gather in my exploration of the topic.
But I don't think you should be. It's the beginning of a conversation, Imad. And
yeah.
thank you for setting that baseline, because I had a question about that last point you were making, which is that,
Okay.
clearly, governments set up a framework within which refugees are recognized and brought and allowed to come. And we could have a lot of discussion about how adequate or inadequate that framework is in Canada and Quebec. But what you're pointing to is that, the responsibility, in a sense, for the person of faith goes beyond that. And clearly with Montreal City Mission, with St. James, with the work Shanna's doing with her group down in Sherbrooke, receiving, giving sanctuary to people claiming refugee status, is like individual citizens going beyond what the legislative framework says or requires. Anwar and I have talked about this many times, about how there's a big chunk missing because too often we look at refugees and immigrants in almost like purely like economic terms, right? Like what contribution will they make to the economy, and that kind, what contribution will they make to the demographics of the place?
That's
And
how
the whole,
governments, yeah.
yeah, but the whole side of community building for us at Montreal City Mission, of friendship and creating spaces for friendship and exchange. I mean, that doesn't really come into the thinking of governments. But I think what you're pointing at is that there are demands made on individuals as well as communities of faith to take steps that go beyond that sort of legal framework, whether it's in the Qur'an or whether it's in Canadian law.
Absolutely, I think this is the point, and this is actually, I just mentioned it here because it's in my mind, because I'm working on my thesis, because there is a big difference here in the Quran doesn't separate law from morality. This is which is what we see in the modern state. The modern state has basically took the place of, it's the supreme authority. It makes the law, it makes the morals, it makes what's right and what's wrong, and that's it. Not it's top. It's in the terms of one German political scientist. It took, the state is the new God. The state took the place of God and created its own theology. So this is a big issue in contrast with the Quran, and even discussing Islamic law, that this separation between law and morality is a big difference. The big, this becomes a bigger debate, but it relates to what you just mentioned, Royal. Personal responsibility goes, in my opinion, way beyond the legislative frameworks.
So we have access to this very learned person, and so I wondered if there are folks who've been listening who have some comments or observations or questions based on the little bit that we've now understood, thanks to Imad digging into this for us. So I'm looking at the screen and inviting people to offer up their comments or pose their questions. Anybody have them? I always have more, but but I want to give other people a chance, especially Anwar, who I know has more.
I have a question. Imad, you mentioned with the Syrian civil war and, of course, the flood of refugees into the neighboring countries. And I'm just wondering, that flood was so large that, I don't know how much debate happened. It just happened because they had to have some place to go. But I'm just wondering, for example, Jordan or Lebanon, was there some kind of a debate between the Muslim community, between people saying, well, this is our duty as Muslims, even though it's way beyond our capacity to welcome these people in terms of our own resources? And were there other people who were pushing back and saying no, like kind of similar to the debates we have here?
Yeah, of course. This is very interesting, Paul. Of course, this is very important. Actually, in Jordan, you didn't have a lot of debate. In Jordan, which is majority Muslim, and this goes with beyond saying, so to speak, that they open their doors and receive refugees. And this is Jordan in particular has a history. It started with 1948, the big migration. The Palestinian refugees were mostly accommodated in Lebanon. During the Lebanese war, hundreds of thousands of Lebanese came to Jordan. Iraq war and the whole misery of Iraq, thousands of Iraqis ended up in Jordan, and lately the Syrians. So Syrians were the latest wave of refugees. So Jordan became, adapt at this. And from the moral view, as you said, there isn't much debate about this. They just come, actually, there's a new city that was established close to the border. It's like a new city now. All Syrian refugees, shops, markets, everything. But in Lebanon, it was different because Lebanon historically, it's Christian and Muslim, and historically they have this power game, and they're afraid to anything that can change this sectarial balance, So the Lebanese coming, the Syrians mostly are Muslims. So there was people who openly intervened from that point of view, that this is screwing up our sectarial balance. In addition to the economic concerns and the how do we take care of this. But in Lebanon, it's more of an audible, a clear debate, not in Jordan. But that's very interesting, of course. That's, yeah.
If I can say something, now, I mean, we know that the Syrians, the border and the camps, they are really facing difficulties. And I'm going back to what you said, Imad, the individual commitment from the Quran, within the traditions, and now they're doing campaign in Palestine 48, the Palestinian theirs. And there's two sides. The secular sides, they say, no, we don't, it's not really, they say that we do not want to do a donation. They said we want to fight the state, the America, also. But the Muslim movement, they say what you said, Imad, it's individual responsibility. Let's donate. And they are donating millions and millions. It's just because it comes from the Quran, from some religious resources. So sometimes it's easy to use the people emotions, and sometimes they use it. So it's
or to politicize, politicize things.
Yeah,
takes a different direction. Yeah.
But I'm happy tonight to know that at least I know where I'm going when I die. So
of course.
Yeah.
Rivers running beneath the gardens. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of praise for those who extend the hand to help in the Quran. Definitely, it's a big issue.
Other comments, questions, observations? I like that last point you made, Anwar, about, I mean, I'm just sort of in my mind thinking about how stories can be inspirational for people, or how people can base good actions in some kind of narrative or story that they hear. And I have to say, when we're working with MCM, sometimes, the story that always comes to my mind when I'm thinking about scriptural basis is the so-called flight to Egypt, when Jesus and his family literally have to flee to survive, and they do that by fleeing to Egypt because Herod is about to kill all the baby boys. So to me, it's, when you're struggling through these social, political justice issues, every so often you sort of reach for a story, whether it's the King of Ethiopia or the flight to Egypt or whatever, how inspirational those little narratives can be in motivating people to do things. Just very interesting. And Anwar was now obviously motivated by the garden with the rivers running under it to keep active in MCM. So we're glad he heard that this evening. Other comments that people might have? Okay. If not, this has been a great conversation, and I really do want to thank Imad on all your behalf for taking the time to think this through and prepare something for us, and share it with us in a way which was rich and useful, and at least for me, very, very much a welcome addition to my understanding of not just the Quran and Islam, but pushing us to think about some of these other things as well. And this brings to an end our little two-part series on the Quran. We still have the Second Testament, the New Testament, however you want to characterize the Gospels and the letters. And we'll be kind of letting people know what we're putting together on that. But it'll be a similar kind of approach where we try to kind of come at it from a slightly different angle, as well as work a little bit with the text. So watch this space for the third and final in our little series of ancient texts and contemporary conversations. A few people to thank. I want to reinforce our thanks that we offered at the beginning to the United Church of Canada Foundation, who helped us do this, to the people at Montreal City Mission and St. James, especially Anwar and Paula, for putting this together. Second, a second thank you to Anwar for worrying about the logistics of this and getting the emails out and making sure the technology works and all those things. I want to kind of cast my mind back too to the first one. This was part of what we did at St. James MCM for Muslim Awareness Week, and very much in my mind was Ehab when last week he kind of talked us through the importance of Muslim Awareness Week, and so this is a continuation of our attempt to do at least a small thing to help people in our city and in our province to understand a little bit better the reality of what it means to be a Muslim and to hold the Quran in such esteem. So unless there's anything else here that we need to cover, I'm looking around the room. I don't see any hands up. Once again, Imad, thank you so much for taking time for us. And I look forward to rejoining folks when we continue with this in the next version of Ancient Texts Contemporary Conversations. So thanks, everybody. Wonderful to see you.
Everyone.
Have a good evening.
Thank you all.
And thank you to our moderator par excellence.
Ah, merci.
Absolutely.
Je vous en prie.
Of course.
Okay, bye-bye. We'll talk to you